Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm really happy today to be joined by Adrien from Pubstack. Today, as you know, the subject is how to maximize monetization while respecting user choices in 2021. So on my side, I'm Antonio. I'm working at Didomi as a product, as a head of product. So I will be happy to go through this webinar with you. Adrien, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So I'm Adrien. I'm a senior data analyst at Pubstack. We are very happy to have you today to talk about how to maximize monetization in 2021. So before we go directly into the topic, Antonio, maybe we can quickly introduce our respective companies. If that's okay.
It's okay for me. Let's just make sure that everybody see the presentation.
Yes.
Can somebody have can give a sign on the chat room? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And I just remind you, if you have any questions, you can post it into the question tab on the app, and we will come back to the questions at the end of the presentation. And don't hesitate to like the questions. There is a voting system, so you can like the different questions. So like this, you can prioritize the questions and see it again. Okay, you wanna start?
Yes. Thank you, Antonio. So, as I mentioned earlier, I work for Pubstack. So Pubstack, basically what we do, we collect and we analyze all the data that impacts publishers' advertising revenue. So basically, we allow publishers' monetization teams to analyze in real time the ad revenue, and in order to help them make better decisions and, of course, maximize their revenue. We have over 60 clients, mainly in Europe for now. And we monitor more than 50 billion ad requests every month. That represents like 200 million euros of revenue every year. And the goal of Pubstack is really to help publisher to save time and to maximize their return on investment by spotting like issues in their ad stack. That's it for Pubstack. Antonio, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Adrien. Well, on our site, Didomi, it's what we call a consent and preference management platform. So in Didomi, we have developed three main solutions to accompany companies with privacy across their customer journey. Everything starts when a customer arrives to the website and he's not recognized. He's just a device ID or an IP address, and he starts by accepting the cookies in this, as you know, the cookie banners. And so we collect cookies with the consent management platform. After that, when this visitor is going to become a consumer creating an account, we have a solution called the Preference Center that helps you collecting different preferences from the user. I don't know, it could be what he likes, what he dislikes, what sports he practices, if he prefers to be connected by or contacted by email, by SMS, or by phone. And so we collect a second level of consent that is based on the person itself. And after that, we provide integrations with different systems, so you can either display custom content to this user based on the preferences. You can synchronize this consent in different platforms as well, so you don't have to ask twice for the consents. Once you already ask in web, then if he logs into the mobile application, you don't have to re-ask again. You just be like seamlessly synchronized between different platforms. We also interface this with marketing and communication tools like emailing tools or any other kind of marketing tool. And of course, we handle the complaints because we store consent and we provide you with proofs in case of litigation. Today, today we are a leader in Europe, and we have 160,000 websites and apps that are connected to Didomi. We handle 2 billion number of devices every quarter, 65 billion of pages views with Didomi consent granted, and every month we handle 1.4 of the global traffic in our Didomi servers. So this is mostly what we do. Don't hesitate if you have any questions, and I think we can move to the core of the presentation.
Thank you, Antonio. So yeah, let's deep dive into today's topic. And the first part of the topic is to answer that question. Most of you already know, but it's always good to repeat it. It is what happens to European traffic with no explicit consent approval. The figures you are going to see on the next few slides is based on an analysis on Pubstack's data. So basically, we monitor Prebid calls. So we look into the Prebid ad call and we see if there's a consent or not. And if there's a consent string, is the consent accepted or refused? So this analysis is based on that, on the publisher we do monitor in the EU. So the first fact, it should be obvious for everybody, is that TCF V2 has been widely embraced by publishers. Today, as of today, roughly 98% of the 1.5 billion daily European auctions we monitor are TCF V2 compliant. Only 1% is TCF V1 compliant, and 1% is not TCF compliant at all. On the graph here, you show the evolution over time. In green, it's TCF V2, in yellow, TCF V1, and in red, it's not TCF compliant. So early August 2020, when TCF V2 was not totally rolled out yet, I think the date was August 15th, you see that TCF V1 was the norm. And now, over time, you see that TCF V2 is becoming the new norm. And now, as of today, on all the publishers we do monitor, 98% of the auctions are TCF V2 compliant. So, zooming in now on this 98% of auctions that are TCF V2 compliant, we can see that on average, based on our publishers, roughly 8% of TCF V2 ad calls embarks no explicit consent approval. So there are two important points here. The first one is that when we say no explicit consent approval, it can cover two different cases. The first scenario is the user refused consent, okay? And the second scenario is there's no consent information in the call, basically. And sometimes this can be due to issues in the CMP implementation, for instance. The second important point is that this 8% is obviously only an average, and the situation is very different according to each publisher. Basically, on the publisher in the analysis, we saw that it was between 2.5% and 25%. Okay, so it depends on the publisher, on its CMP implementation, also on its audience, obviously, because some audiences are more prone to refuse consent. So, but on average, it's 8%. Now, zooming in on this 8% of auction that are TCF V2 compliant and that embarks no consent information or no explicit consent information, we see that they account for less than 1% of Prebid revenue. Okay, the main reason, I guess you guys are all aware, is that Google Adserver, Google Ad Manager, is now blocking ad calls when Google doesn't have an explicit consent for purpose one. Okay, so the legitimate question is, why is it still 1% of Prebid revenue? Why is it not like 0% in the end? The answer is we also analyze publishers who were not running on Google Adserver, for instance, AppNexus Adserver or Smart Adserver, and also, but it's a very small part of that, Google has a feature called Google Limited Ads. We'll come back to this later on in this presentation, that can, under some conditions, monetize the refused consent. So, to sum up until now, we have roughly 8% of auctions with no consent information or refused consent, and they account only for 1% of the revenue. But the interesting thing is that when you look at Prebid bidding pattern, you see that Prebid still finds value on the auctions when there's no consent information or a refused consent. Okay, this depends a lot, obviously, on the SSPs that are plugged in Prebid, because some SSPs just don't bid on that traffic and other have some demand for that traffic. But roughly, we see that Prebid is willing to bid on not consent traffic roughly between 15 and 35% of the value it would have bid on this inventory if there was an accepted consent, basically. So two main takeaways from this. First, well, there's still value. There's value here, okay? But it's kind of small. You're going to tell me 15 to 35%. Yeah, it's quite a small number. But there's value to be taken back. And also, if you want to maximize that value, you're going to have, in the end, to plug other demand sources. Okay, but we'll come back to that later on. So, to sum up that first part, which was the analysis on Pubstack publishers data, on average, our publishers are losing 8 to 10% of their programmatic revenues, either because user refused consent or because the ad call didn't embark an approved consent or a refused consent, okay, because there was a misconfiguration of the CMP, okay. And this number is bound to rise this year, especially in France, with the new GDPR regulations, where you'll have to have an accept all or refuse all button on the CMP. So the next question is how to recoup on that loss. And what we are going to talk to you today about is a three-part strategy to recoup that loss. The first part is to look out for misconfigurations leading to no consent information in the ad call. So the first part of the strategy is to reduce the number of ad calls where the consent information is missing. The second part, where Antonio will lead, is how to optimize your CMP to lower the number of users who denied consent. So the objective here is to reduce the number of ad calls with a refused consent. And the last part of the strategy, and we believe it's really the last part, It's the things you do last. It's not the first thing you need to do. I think is to monetize the users who refuse consent. And for that, there are two options that can be both applied. It's first to give yourself a second chance to get that consent, and second, to find alternative solutions for refused consent inventory. So let's start with the first part of the strategy, which is look out for misconfigurations. So the things that we're going to talk about here are use cases that we saw on our publishers, basically. The first thing, it seems very basic, but it's obviously one thing to do, is to make sure that your CMP is triggered on all your website. For that, you can plot the consent stat by URL, either through your CMP analytics module or through a Prebid analytics module like Pubstack. So here on the graph, on the x-axis, you see the URLs of the publishers. Here are the auctions, and in red, it's when the auction is not TCF V2 compliant. And it's bluish green, it's when it is. So you can obviously see that there are a few URLs, 4 of them, this one, this here, that's where the CMP is not plugged, okay? And basically, that means that when the user comes into your site through this URL, it doesn't have a chance to register its consent. So that's the first obvious misconfiguration. The second one, which is more important and costs more revenue, is to make sure that Prebid and your ad server are called after user choice is registered. Because otherwise, you're going to lose the first page view value of a user who hasn't registered its consent yet. So the use case we saw here, we saw it on several publishers, but the most important one was one publisher who lost 35% of its programmatic revenue because Prebid and Google Ad Server calls were made before the CMP registered the choice. So here you have an example of what it looks like. Basically, you can see that the CMP is still on the screen here because you have the accept button in red and the more info button in gray. And here in the console, you can see that Prebid has been called, basically, and the auction is done. And you can see below what the CMP is answering when we ask for consent. And they say that it's loaded and that the CMP is shown, but the user has not registered consent or a refusal yet. Another misconfiguration that's not it's not really a misconfiguration because but it's important to say something about that, is that CMPs are not immune to how to say that they're not immune to bugs or issues, especially when a new version is released. So here you have an example of several publishers losing almost 100% of their programmatic revenues on traffic outside Europe when a major US CMP released a new version. So in green on the graph is the day where the new version of the CMP was released. In yellow, it's the day before. You see on the U traffic that everything is going fine, but on the traffic outside of Europe, you see here at 3 a.m. the big drop in green. It's where the new version was released, and here is the rollback. Okay, so it's also important to know that even if it's rare, it can happen. Okay, but it's not the most common thing that can happen, basically. The last misconfiguration, or rather, I would say the things never to do, is to never press the nuclear button. So for those of you who run on Google Adserver, and I imagine it's most of you guys, in the EU user consent, you have a box that you can tick, which is enable Google to check consent for all reservation creatives in GAM. Okay. And basically, we have some publishers who tick that box. And, it was not a mistake because, you want to make sure that whoever is winning the display has the consent of the user to display in the end. Okay. But what happened was the following. Publisher A lost 2,000 euros a day, roughly 50% of Prebid revenue. Here you can see it ticked the box on December 17th and its revenue was cut in half. And then he unticked the box here. Publisher B lost 100% of its revenue. Okay, in green is the day before it ticked the button, and in yellow it's the day it ticked the button. And you see that its Prebid revenue is zero or close to zero in yellow. So why is that? The explanation, it's only an educated guess, but basically, for Google to check that whoever wins a display has the user consent, Google needs to know who wins a display. That's obvious. And basically, for Prebid, apparently Google has difficulties knowing which SSP is winning the display. If you have only one set of line items for all your Prebid, so that was the case of publisher B, apparently Google is not able to know if it's Rubicon, AppNexus, Crideo, whoever, who wins the display within Prebid. So that's why it cut all Prebid revenue, because Google not being able to know which SSP won the display, it couldn't verify that it had the consent. And if you have one set of line item for every Prebid bidder, which was the case of publisher A, apparently, even if that's the case, Google has difficulties identifying some of the SSPs. Okay, is aware of I think AppNexus, Rubicon, maybe a few other ones, but there are a lot of SSPs that it doesn't manage to recognize. So it cannot check for consent for these SSPs. So that's why publisher A lost only 50% of its Prebid revenue. Okay. So that's it for the different misconfigurations, some use case on how to reduce the numbers of ad calls that are sent out with no consent information. Now, for the second part about how to reduce the number of ad calls that are sent out with a refused consent, I let Antonio take over.
Thank you, Adrien. It's quite interesting. I really love the pics of the horror face on your presentation. I will try to go really quick to how to optimize your CMP to lower the opt-out rate. I will come back to a few of the points that you mentioned, especially the one that uploading or collecting the consent before the Prebid is sent. It's quite important. There is also a part integration that it's key in there. But let's get started. So some of the key design elements I'm going to talk about. So there is three main design elements. I was about to say that all these came from a research that we did. We took quite like 40 million page views in the example, and then we try to filter all this and see what was the trend about conversion. And we identify three major topics. The first one, it's about the consent notice title. The second one is the format of the integration, and the third one is the look and feel in the buttons for the accepting note or configuring your granular options. So let me go to the first point, and this is the most important point of all of them. There is one point to to keep. Please use this one. Consent notice with a clear explanatory title can increase your consent rate up to plus 3 times the consent rate. It's really huge. Actually, what we are seeing is that a consent notice that doesn't have a title is never going to go up 35% of consent rate. And once a consent notice has a title, it's always going to keep on top of, it's not going to go below 70% of consent rate. And what is this? It's because I'm arriving to a website and I have this banner that appears to me with a block of text, as you can see it on the right. And it doesn't tell me what it's about. It's just asking me refuse or agree. And I don't know what it's about. But actually, if I add a sexy title, say like, your privacy is our priority. I know we love cookies. I know we are here to protect your privacy. Actually, it's more easy to accept it because if I say your privacy is our priority, do you refuse it or you accept it? Because there's one part that nobody's going to read, which is the mandatory text that is in the middle. Because it's too small, there is a lot of regulations there, some things that we have to say. And actually, the part that you are not really control, well, it has to be true and it has to be clear as well. But where you have the most flexibility is in the title. And this title can really trigger a high conversion. My second point is the consent notice format. And what we observe is that a full screen blocking pop-in has a higher consent rate than a banner. And this doesn't affect the bounce rate, which is quite like the scary part of it. We say, okay, I better have, most of you take the decision to have a small banner on the bottom, and you allow the user to start seeing your content, and maybe this is also what you are sending Prebid before collecting the consent. Now, because actually the user already access to the website, you try to monetize on the first page, and he's actually not consenting yet. And regardless of this, the consent rate with what we call the pop-in or the full screen is between 90 and 98%, when the consent rate with a banner is from 60 to 75%. And we doesn't observe a real impact in the bounce rate with in both formats. The third point will be the look and feel of the buttons. We observe as well that there is a big trend, almost multiplied by 2 in terms of consent rate. When in the left you have a different color for every button, and in the right you have a lot of people, they use the same color for the refuse and the agree and close. So there are 2 actions. These 2 actions need to be distinguished. I'm not saying that you have to have an agree and close button that is going to be shiny and like saying click here, click here. It's just to make a difference, because those are 2 different actions. So it's easier for the user to differentiate what he's either accepting or not. He's not just looking for something to close. And this is also a main point that can bring you a really high, or really to help you increase your consent rate. There is a 4th point, which it's minor, because Today, this is the second page of the consent notice when somebody actually click in the more information or configure my choices link. And this page for today for us in web, it's 77% of the traffic. In mobile, it's 0.5%. So it's really minimum. But we see an improving conversion when we are in this page if we use categories for the different purposes. And some of the CMPs that allow you to categorize this into all the, this case, all the TCF purposes into small categories. And then it's easier for the user actually to accept them all or to read them. Instead of reading 16 different purposes, they're going to read just 3 of them. If they want to know more, they can click on it and it opens or goes to the next page. It depends on the CMP. And it helps you increase the accept ratio, because if it's too complicated, you just like end up clicking the refuse button. One more thing is to mutualize consent. Today, you can make it clear for your user that he is accepting consent for your website and some other websites. If you are a publisher that have, I don't know, 20 different websites, you can also make it clear for your client with a link on your consent notice saying that you are accepting the consent for all these different sites. So once one user is accepting the consent in the first website, then the CMP centralize the consent and then spread it around all the other different websites of this group. And when the user goes to the second website, we don't have to ask again the consent, so we reduce the consent fatigue. And as well, if he accepted, you don't have to risk again for him to say no in the second website. But if he says no in the first website, you can re-ask the question in the third, in the second one. So it's a good way to capitalize in when you have several websites as a publisher. And that's it for my advices. So we'll come back to a recap at the end, but mostly there is one more advice. It's about in the third part, which is how to monetize on your users who refuse consent. There is one more advice, which is give yourself a second chance to get that consent. So how do you do it? Let's say, okay, you optimize already your CMP. You have all the good practices. You have a title, you have the right format, you integrate it properly, a difference in the buttons, and still you have 5% of people saying, no, I don't want the cookies. So one of the good ways to monetize on them is to use a paywall. So either the paywall allows you to do 2 things. Either you can push them to subscribe, or either you can push them to accept target ads or accept the cookies to unlock the articles. Well, this is a good way. It's accepted. It's accepted in France and most of the countries. So this is another good practice.
Thank you, Antonio. I'm gonna take over for the next few slides, and the second option to monetize user who refuse consent. So as you understood, the first one was to like get back this user through basically a paywall or a cookie wall, which, to answer a question that I saw in the chat, is not illegal in France. Basically, it was supposed to be forbidden, but there was like some other commission who said, no, it's okay, finally. So that's an option. The other option is to find alternative solutions to monetize the refused consent inventory. The idea behind that is that the CMPs are not ad blockers. Basically, the consent obviously is required to use cookies and personal data, but consent is not needed to display ads. So this opens the door to ads that are not reliant on personal data. So it can be contextual ads, for instance, direct campaigns with no personal data. So the question is, okay, but if I have Google Adserver, they are blocking this inventory. So how can I do that? So today on the market, we identified like three opportunities to do that. The first one is to use Google Limited Ads. So Google Limited Ads is a Google Ad Manager feature that allows to display ads when consent one is refused for Google. The pros of that is obviously there's no implementation cost. Okay, just a GAM feature, so it's easy to implement. The second pro is that you have all your reporting in one place, Google Ad Manager. Okay, you have a dimension in Google Ad Manager. I think it's called serving restriction, which indicates if it's Google limited ads or not restricted inventory, basically. But that comes with quite a lot of cons. The first one is, and it's the biggest blocker, you need to have legitimate interest or consent for a few purposes, 2, 7, 9, 10, while most users today, they refused everything. Either they accept everything or they refuse everything. They're not cherry picking which purpose or um, which SSPs or has the right to use their data. So that's a big blocker, obviously. It depends on the country, and it comes. I mean, it's a legal issue, and I'm not specialist at all in this field. But basically, I understood that in some countries, it was okay to register for the publisher to register the legitimate interest, even if the user said refusal. In other countries, it might not be the case. So yeah, it's really country specific. The second blocker, second cons, sorry, is that there's limited demand available. So from the first understanding of Google Limited Ads that we had was that it would be only direct campaigns, so sponsorship, standard campaigns, and house campaigns. Turns out I had a look at our publishers recently, and apparently there's some price priority, so Prebid campaigns, also Prebid line items that manage to display with Google Limited Ads. Okay, it's not a lot; it's very small in terms of revenue, but there's I don't know if it's if it's a feature or if it's a bug. But in the beginning, it was supposed to be only sponsorship, standard, and house campaigns, and some price priority are going through it. Anyway, most of our publishers today who use Google Limited Ads, they mostly use it to display house campaigns, so self-promotion, stuff like that. So it's not direct revenue, it can be indirect revenue, but it's not like cash money, basically. The second option is to use Prebid wrapper to render the ads directly. So that means implementing an in-house solution to bypass the ad server and render Prebid winning bid. So the pro for that is that it works even if all purposes are refused. You don't need legitimate interest or accept some specific purposes. The cons are obviously the implementation cost. okay, because it might be an in-house solution. You're not going to be able to render direct campaigns, except if you do an elaborate setup, an elaborate in-house solution. And it can be hard to monitor or report on, because obviously this won't go through your ad server, okay? So, except if you have Pubstack. If you have Pubstack, it would be very easy. But otherwise, if you just rely on your ad server for your reporting, it's going to be an issue. A side note to that, I learned just a few days ago that Xandr seems to have implemented a solution doing just that. It's called Simple Ads. And basically what Simple Ads is doing apparently is rendering the Prebid bid, basically. The last solution you have, the last solution we identified, is to use a secondary ad server, such as Smart Adserver, for instance, but it can be another one. It's just that we know that Smart is doing that. That other ad server are not blocking ad calls if the consent is refused. Okay, so basically the idea is to split the traffic depending on the consent given by the user. If the consent is approved, it goes through the usual route, going to your main ad server. And if it's refused, it goes to a secondary ad server. The pros for that solution is that it works even if all purposes are refused, again, and you can monetize all demand sources. Okay, it might be a little bit painful because you may have to duplicate direct campaigns in the second ad server, etc., but it's doable in the end. The cons, obviously, implementation cost, because you're going to need to set up a second ad server, so obviously it takes time, and your reporting will be scattered in 2 places, basically 2 different ad servers. So now that you may have implemented one of those 3 solutions, what you want to do, and that will be the last point, is to plug more demand sources. Why? Because we saw that, if you remember the beginning of the presentation and the analysis, Prebid is only willing to bid between 15% and 35% of the value when the user consent is refused. So what kind of demand sources do you want to plug? First, like contextual demand sources. So there are a few SSPs or DSPs doing just that. So just to name drop a few of them, Query, BOP, sure, a lot of other are doing the same thing. So this obviously works with no cookie, so no consent. So it's perfect for this kind of situation. Also, you may want to try to pitch direct campaigns targeted specifically on the refused consent inventory. And finally, especially if you use Google Limited Ads, you may want to plug self-promotion through in-house campaigns. It will not be direct revenue, but it can yield indirect revenue, obviously. So really, here it is. I'm going to let Antonio have the final word, if you want, Antonio.
Of course. Thank you, Adrien. Apologies for, I saw in the chat that you were hearing my dog snoring. Apologies for that. So the conclusion, what are the takeaways? Optimize your consent notice integration. It's really important. Optimize your consent notice look and feel. Catch up client consent at the right moment, especially the ones that refuse it. So try to catch them or to bring them back to the good side afterwards. Monetize on ads not reliant on personal data, and plug additional demand sources. So this is it for today's webinar. Thank you all. I saw there are many questions in the chat. I tried to answer, and I think Adrien as well.
Maybe we can take the last few ones that are not answered, if that's okay for you, Antonio.
Yep.
Or if anyone has any other question, feel free to put it now in the question chat. So I have one. Pubstack, any idea of the revenue impact on a no consent impression? You mentioned from 18% to 35%. Yes. So basically, yes. Well, what we saw that when there was no consent, based on Prebid, Prebid is willing to pay between 15 and 35%. So if it ends up in an impression, if it's not blocked by GAM, and you can expect that the revenue you'd get from that impression would be between 15 and 35% of what you'd get from an impression where the user said, okay, I give my consent.
I think he's answered you. Frank say, but it is buying.
Well, I mean, Prebid wants to buy, but if it's blocked by the ad server, it cannot buy. So basically, if you manage to find a way to bypass the ad server, if you render directly, it will be able to buy at 15, 35% of the value.
There is one question from Carlos Javier Delgado. Have Didomi planned into his roadmap solution for having to wait for the Didomi library? It's ready if the user has stored the consent. I think there is something on the something ongoing about it, but I will be happy to contact you to get more details. And don't hesitate. I can post you my personal my direct email so you can drop me something if you have new ideas.
And I think I just saw one maybe question for you, Antonio, but maybe it's more like a legal one. So maybe in the follow-up, Frank wanted to know if having one CMP for several websites was actually legal in France.
It is. It is legal. There's a clear position on the CNIL. It has to be clear for the user. It has to be well specified. We have to access and to be able to access the list of websites. There is many examples that I can give to you. And you can go to Orange and all the different partners of Orange, they collect the consent from one single point, especially from Orange and Sosh. And there is other publisher groups in France that they actually do it as well.
Great, thanks. I think we have two maybe last questions, and the rest will be in the follow-up. And I think they are for you, Antonio.
Yep.
You're the most
regarding the colors of the consent buttons, did you say it was best to have the color confirmed? As in all colors should be the same? No, the colors shouldn't be the same. The colors should be different. And so there are two actions, two colors. I guess this answers the question. The second one. Is Google ATP consent handled on the same level as TCF consent at Didomi? Well, I'm not sure I can answer you the question, Karen, but I will be happy to. Okay, I think Damian from my team is answering to you. There is a, oh, there's a few other questions. Let's go through them.
Well, I can take one from Yannick, who asked, you spoke about smart solution, adding it as a second ad server. Its implementation could be costly, but if it allows to monetize all demand sources, would it be worse in general? Instead of losing money because of the non-consent. So, I mean, I guess the first message that I wanted to convey today was really, I think Antonio is on the same page as me, is really, this is the last solution. First is, I think we think that publishers need to work first and foremost on lowering the opt-out rate and the no consent rate, which were the first two parts of the strategy. Then, if you still have a rather important share of voice of your user who refused consent, you might consider implementing, for instance, a second ad server like Smart. So of course, it depends on if you have like 1% of the user refusing, or if you have 10%, it's not the same deal, obviously. But yes, I mean, from what I learned from having a second ad server, it can monetize all demand sources, okay? But obviously, you'll have to duplicate, if we're talking about direct campaigns, you'll have to duplicate them in the second ad server. So you have to, I mean, it's not easy to manage. Okay, the easiest way is to have specific direct campaigns on the refuse inventory. Okay, I know also that Smart is plugging some its own demand. So yeah, I mean, it's a trade-off that has to be made. Obviously, if you have 15%, 15% of refuse consent, you may want to consider going through a second ad server or in-house solution or whatever.
There's a question about Claudia from Italy. She's saying, we spoke about giving the user a second chance to accept the CMP, but how is it possible to do it without stressing them a lot? In Italy, we can re-ask only after 15 minutes. Well, in France, I don't think it's allowed to, to do it after 15 minutes. The duration of the consent, it's much more longer. Actually, what we are saying is what we call the kind of like a granular consent. After you optimize everything, what we are actually suggesting is to get a paywall solution or a cookie wall solution, which I'm sure you are aware of this publisher websites where you arrive and for some reason you have, for example, premium content, and you can start reading a part of the text, and then you have a small banner that tells you, okay, you want to continue, please subscribe or get a premium subscription to access to this content. You can actually do the same with the model about advertising or not. So you can ask your user accept the advertising cookies to access to this content, for example. It's this is the solution that we are talking about, not to stress them out with the banner in every single page. I saw another question. It's in the optimization you show actually misleading the user. Your privacy, it's our priority. Agree and close. Well, it's yeah, it's the example that I took. This title can say many things. The best practice that I'm telling you is to actually say to the user what's the banner about. It can say something simple as I know, please make a choice in terms of cookies. We are there to protect your privacy. Please make a choice, or we use cookies for X or Y reasons. And it's just something that is clear for the user, that what what is this about? It's not just a weird popping that appears and we don't know what it is and we have to close. But well, it's a good message as well. The text talks about privacy, and I think this is your priority. And all the other legal text is already there. So so it's up to you to do it in the best way that you feel it.
I think we ran out of questions, Antonio.
I think so as well. Okay.
And we're running out of time, so it's perfect timing.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, everyone. Remember that the webinar will be posted in the stream, so you can re-see it again. And thank you for your time. And see you soon.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.